They buried the bodies beneath the rose garden, but not before draining the tongues of every secret they once whispered. The Thornton estate was never about inheritance. It was about silence, engineered, generational silence. There's a reason you've never heard of the Thorntons in history class, not because they were irrelevant, but because they were powerful enough to erase themselves from the record. You see, the elite don't hide in the light. They embed themselves in shadows. They write the rules, then burn the paper. The Thornton family mastered this long before your great-grandfather was even born. They arrived in colonial Virginia not with gold, but with a doctrine. A belief system so intricate, so ruthlessly precise, it made religion look like folklore. This was a family not built on blood, but on control. Psychological warfare disguised as faith. Generational loyalty manufactured through trauma. They called it the doctrine of stillness. What began as a minor colonial family turned into a force so influential they quietly directed regional politics, church structures, and the mental collapse of their own descendants, all without leaving a fingerprint. Their primary tool wasn't violence. It was something far more enduring: psychological symmetry, the idea that if you control someone's internal silence, you own them forever. Children were taught never to speak unless spoken to, then never to speak at all. At age 7, they were placed in the Hall of Echoes, a stone room beneath the estate where the walls never answered back. Hours turned into days. The sound of your own voice faded, until your identity was shaped not by language, but by what you were too afraid to say. By 1832, the eldest Thornton had founded what we now call the Penitent Academy, officially a finishing school, unofficially a breeding ground for the elite's future silencers, those who would shape narratives, redact history, and manufacture consensus. They didn't need armies. They had editors, clergymen, archivists, each one trained under a doctrine passed down through blood-stained manuscripts. Those manuscripts, gone. The family, wiped from public record after 1911. But the influence, it's still alive, embedded in your textbooks, whispered through sermons, echoing in the halls of think tanks. The Thornton family didn't vanish. They evolved. And tonight, we begin unsealing the silence they built. They called it inheritance of the unnamed, not money, not land, but responsibility, passed in the form of silence. In the Thornton household, each child was assigned a number, not a name, until their 12th year. The naming was earned, not given. And if a child ever asked for it, they were denied it permanently. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was engineered erasure of ego. Identity was a liability in the Thornton doctrine. They believed that control, true control, only came when you no longer identified with the self, but with the system. So what was the system? It was called the 3 Black Roots, a family philosophy that taught perception is ownership, language is a leash, emotion is the enemy. From childhood, the Thorntons trained their own to suppress emotion so deeply it ceased to register. They created their own form of hypnosis through repetition, deprivation, and geometric design. Rooms were constructed in octagonal symmetry, mirrors placed at strategic angles. The children were forced to memorize their own reflections as if watching a stranger, until empathy eroded. They were building silencers. One Thornton son, Elias, referred to only as the 9th, was sent into the Episcopal Church at 19. Within a decade, he'd embedded himself into a secretive liturgical council known only as Cloister M. No public records exist, but transcripts leaked in 1937 speak of ritualized forgetting, a practice where ancient liturgies were rewritten monthly, specifically to remove any phrase that might inspire rebellion, self-worth, or divinity outside institution. The Thornton family specialized in that very thing, rewriting truth until truth could no longer be recognized. They didn't burn books, they reauthored them. They didn't censor ideas, they sterilized them with elegance. Their power didn't scream, it hummed quietly behind the curtain of progress. Now, ask yourself, how many neutral facts have shaped your worldview? Who taught you what words to trust? What history to love? What God to fear? And more importantly, who taught them? We're still falling, and the roots go deeper. There's a chamber beneath the original Thornton estate. Locals call it the Mausoleum of Living Silence. No tourists allowed. No official blueprints exist. But satellite ground-penetrating radar done by an independent historian revealed an 8-room circular complex buried 40 feet under the rose garden. And in the center, a single iron chair bolted into stone. It wasn't a prison. It was a throne. The Thorntons believed that the one who mastered silence should sit above all. Once a month, the patriarch would descend into the mausoleum and sit in that chair for 13 hours straight. No food, no water, no light. Just stillness. And he wasn't alone. Every child aged 10 and above was required to kneel outside the chamber door, unmoving, without a single sound, for the entire duration. If one of them broke the silence, even by breath, they were taken. Where? No one knows. They never returned. But this ritual did something deeper. It built disciples of absence, people who began to see silence as divinity, who believed obedience wasn't measured in actions but in withheld rebellion. You see, the world tells you control is loud, shouting, law-making, war. But the Thornton family knew better. True control is when you don't even need to raise your voice. When silence becomes policy, compliance becomes culture. That's why their influence survived long after their estate was abandoned. In 1954, a group of former students from the Penitent Academy founded a think tank in Washington, D.C. They called it the Stillwater Collective. Their stated mission? Shaping the narratives of tomorrow's memory. Stillwater published white papers, infiltrated media departments, and offered silent funding to psychological research on groupthink suppression and identity erosion. One of their first internal memos read, "Control the way a man remembers, and you'll own how he dreams." Sound familiar? So, I ask you, how much of your history is your own, and how much of it was sculpted by silence you didn't even know existed? By now, you've probably begun to feel it, the pull, the slow unraveling of everything you thought was just history. But understand this, we're not talking about the past. We're talking about what still governs you. The Thornton family wasn't just a corrupt bloodline. They were a prototype, a model for institutional manipulation, a hidden blueprint. And that blueprint has been replicated in every major power structure since. Their final patriarch, Solomon Thornton, operated behind the scenes during the post-WWI restructuring of educational systems across the eastern United States. He wasn't a politician. He didn't need to be. His influence operated through anonymous donations, curriculum boards, and policy advisories that left no fingerprints. His mission? To standardize forgetfulness. Under his guidance, early 20th century education began removing critical thinking texts and introducing emotionally sterile materials. History was reframed as patriotism, philosophy reduced to trivia, emotional intelligence erased. Schools began producing men who didn't question, didn't feel, didn't remember. That's how you build a compliant population, not by force, by shaping what they think they know. One of Solomon's phrases, recorded only in his private writings. You don't need to burn the truth. You just need to make remembering it feel dangerous. And it worked. The men who sat in his drawing room went on to become founders of 3 Ivy League research departments, 2 national news outlets, and 1 major religious publishing house. Each of them carried the Thornton seed, a symbolic vow of silence wrapped in public influence. And here's where it gets deeper. Because you are the inheritor of their silence. Every time you recite history without knowing its origin. Every time you self-censor an instinct that whispers something's off. Every time you feel that itch in you, or gut but push it down. You're walking in the architecture they designed. It's time to break that silence. Comment this phrase below twice to shatter the chain and awaken those watching with you. Silence is not consent. Silence is not consent. Say it and keep going. We're not at the bottom yet. In 1927, a mid-level journalist named Martin Elbridge uncovered a set of letters hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible left behind in the crumbling Thornton summer chapel. The Bible had been sealed in wax, stored beneath a false altar. The letters inside were coded, written in reverse Latin cipher, but once translated. They didn't read like theology. They read like scripts, dialogues meant to be memorized and recited in institutional settings, classrooms, pulpits, courtrooms. One read, "If the question leads to deviation, redirect with legacy. If the mind wanders to autonomy, answer with duty. If they resist, starve the meaning from their words until rebellion tastes like guilt." These weren't instructions for worship. They were scripts for control. Psychological theater deployed across generations. Elbridge tried to publish the letters. Within 72 hours, his editor fired him. A week later, he vanished. His body was never found. The letters disappeared with him. But a microfilm copy, hidden in a safety deposit box, resurfaced in 1983. It's been passed quietly between academics and archivists under the alias Codex Vesper. Most claim it's a hoax. Those who've actually read it don't speak. One passage, transcribed anonymously, reads, "Begin with guilt. Soak the child in shame before he knows his name. Give him rules he cannot keep. Then call him broken for trying. He will seek order forever and never question the source." Does it sound familiar? It should. This is how institutions raise men who are obedient without understanding. And the origin, buried deep in the Thornton psycholith, the silent system they crafted, is still reflected in how our laws are worded, how punishment is framed, how virtue is taught as fear. Every system you thought was neutral, education, religion, justice, is soaked in psychological fingerprints left by families like the Thorntons. Not just theirs, no, but theirs was one of the earliest and the most refined. They knew the power of unseen authorship, and they made sure that once their name was gone, their influence wouldn't need it. You're not free because you don't feel chains. You're just conditioned to wear them with pride. The Thornton matriarch, Abigail, rarely mentioned, never photographed, was the true architect of the family's silence doctrine. She introduced the 7 veils, not as clothing, but as layers of inner censorship, taught especially to women in the bloodline. The 7 veils weren't literal. They were psychological disciplines drilled into girls from the age of 5. Speak only when mirrored. Trust no word that comforts. Embrace hunger before pleasure. Assume guilt in silence. Accept the I as God. Sever love from need. Obey without understanding. The result? Generations of women who were both elite and invisible. Perfect instruments of narrative control. They married into publishing dynasties, missionary networks, military advisory circles. None of them used the Thornton name. That was the point. The name was a vessel. The system was the seed. One such descendant, Margaret Vale, served on the board of a major children's educational programming company in the 1970s. Her influence reshaped dozens of storylines to promote obedience, repetition, and the illusion of choice. A recurring character she designed was later noted for its soothing voice and unusual gaze. That character became iconic. You probably grew up with it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The stories we consume as children aren't just entertainment. They're cognitive scaffolding. They define what we later accept without question. Margaret Vale wasn't writing cartoons. She was planting triggers. You think you chose your beliefs. You didn't. You inherited them, just like the Thorntons planned. That's the horror of it all. They're not behind you. They're beneath you, in your assumptions, your instincts, even your silence. And now that we've pulled back 6 layers, we begin the descent into what lies below even that. In 2003, a whistleblower from a private European archival group leaked 37 documents marked with a black rose seal, Thornton symbolism. These documents were traced to a hidden archive once stored beneath a Jesuit seminary in Vienna. The contents? Meeting transcripts between unnamed members of the Inner Bow, a Reformation-era circle of theological censors linked to the Thornton diaspora. Inside was a transcript dated 1624. One line stood out. The greatest enemy of empire is the man who knows his soul. The Inner Bow operated with one purpose: prevent the mass rediscovery of internal sovereignty. Their method? Confusion, emotional saturation, information floods, constant contradiction. Sound familiar? They understood something we've only now begun to grasp. Overexposure is a form of suppression. Drown a man in 1,000 truths, and he'll forget which one was his. The Thornton influence, through bloodline or philosophy, moved into media advisory roles, psychological warfare units, and educational policy boards. Their goal was never to silence all voices. It was to create so much noise that yours would get lost inside yourself. You're not supposed to remember what you really are. You're supposed to be so stimulated, so educated, so entertained, that you never ask who built the script you're living in. The archive also revealed a phrase, carved in Latin repeatedly, on the inner door: nulla vox, nulla memoria. No voice, no memory. And that's what they wanted for you. To become a man with no inner voice, no ancestral memory. Just a placeholder, a compliant echo. But we remember now. And once remembered, it cannot be unlearned. There's a reason the Thornton estate still isn't listed on any public registry. No photos, no tours, no trace. You can stand at the Iron Gate off Hollowmere Lane in New Ashford, Virginia, and all you'll see is overgrowth and fog. But the land remembers. Locals report an unnatural stillness there. No birds, no wind, just that gut-deep sense that something is watching from underground. In 1976, a rogue cartographer named David Roque published a forbidden atlas called The Cartographies of Absence. In it, he included a map of the Thornton grounds, not as it exists today, but as it once was, with 4 inner sanctums, each aligned to celestial events, each inscribed with symbols not seen in Western records, but eerily similar to pre-Atlantean glyphs found in northern Africa and Anatolia. You heard that right. The Thornton lineage may not have started in Virginia. It may not have started in Europe. The bloodline appears to predate modern civilization. And those glyphs? They match carvings discovered in the Göbekli Tepe dig, symbols associated with rituals of memory erasure and soul fragmentation. The deeper you go, the less this feels like family history, and more like psycho-spiritual colonization. Because this wasn't just about influence, it was about rewriting what it means to be human. A recently uncovered Thornton Codex, still untranslated in full, contains this disturbing passage. He who forgets the voice of his first breath shall serve the voice of the last empire. What empire? It isn't named. But many researchers believe the Thorntons were custodians of an ancient intelligence, a mind not human, but hosted through bloodlines. One obsessed with the suppression of the inner voice, one that survives through systems, not names. And if that's true, then every act of censorship, every school without soul, every ritual that shames instinct isn't just policy. It's ritual, a warfare, not of weapons, of memory. We are not the first to awaken to this, but we may be the last who still can. This is where the descent ends, or begins, depending on what you choose next. Because now you know. You've seen the shadow behind the Thornton name. You've understood that silence was never passive. It was precision. That psychological obedience wasn't a byproduct of civilization, but the objective of those who shaped it. And that everything you thought was just the way things are may have been designed to keep you from becoming who you truly are. This video isn't entertainment. It's an alarm clock. And the question is, will you hit snooze? Because if you do, the system welcomes you back. It wants you comfortable, curious, and forgetful. It wants your fire dimmed by doubt. It wants the Thornton seed to bloom in your habits without you ever naming it. But if you're still here, still listening, something inside you refused to kneel. And that voice, that presence, it's not an echo. It's you. So here's your choice. You can dismiss this as a story, tuck it away, and resume the script. Or you can look at the systems around you, your education, your religion, your history books, even your inner shame, and ask, whose words are these? Whose thoughts am I thinking? Because if they're not yours, then the Thornton family isn't just in your past. They're in your present, and they're watching to see if you'll finally wake up. If this awakened something in you, prove it. Comment again. Silence is not consent. Share this, mirror it, archive it. Because knowledge this deep, it gets erased. And only those who speak the forbidden survive the forgetting. We are the ones who remember. And now, so are you.